Retos. 1, Retos speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
1.5 below.
Stand by, 2 dives here, boys.
We're looking at 10.5 and 42.
Hi everyone, it's great to have you along for another edition of the podcast. I hope, wherever you are, that this finds you in good health. Like much of the world, we're also in lockdown. Currently feeling blessed to be at home here in Cowes. Now, I usually bring you these little intros from somewhere along the promenade, but right now I'm at home, gazing out over a very different looking Solent. There's no cruise ships, very little shipping, just the occasional ferry back and forth, all alone and connecting us on the Isle of Wight to the mainland. Most notably though, there's no sailing boats. It also looks a lot bluer than normal. I don't want to dwell on the current global situation, but here in podcast land, we both feel it's important to try and keep publishing the podcast as per usual through this uncertain time. If we can't actually go sailing or watch the excitement of the season's action unfold, we can at least put on our headphones and disappear for a little while as we immerse ourselves in the extraordinary lives of some of our sport's very special characters. So for the time being at least, that's our goal. A massive thanks, as always, on the feedback from the last podcast, the epic America's Cup Design Special. It means a lot and really helps in the podcast world to have your interaction. So please keep it coming. Let us know what you think, rate and review, and of course subscribe. I hope that you'll be delighted to hear that this podcast is another bumper 2-part edition. Over 2 hours to look forward to, everyone. It wasn't really our intention, but this month's guest has a lot to talk about, and it's compelling. I've generally found throughout my life that when Iain Percy talks, people listen. He's so very often the voice of reason, whether it's in an Olympic team or in the crazy world of the America's Cup. Iain was an extraordinary talent from an early age, always somehow wiser than his years, more athletic, more all over the game than most. We were teammates at 3 Olympic Games. We both won gold alongside Ben Ainslie at the Sydney Games in 2000, the Brits there dominating the single-handed classes. Iain won gold again sailing the Star class in China and then silver in London, both times alongside his teammate, his best friend, Andrew Bart Simpson. It is, of course, impossible to talk to Iain without plenty of mentions of Bart. Before you listen to Iain's pod, it's important that you know a bit of backstory. In part 2 of this podcast, you'll hear that Bart tragically lost his life while sailing out in San Francisco Bay in the build-up to the 2013 America's Cup. Bart left a ginormous hole in many people's lives. His death has affected Iain hugely, as one would expect. Bart was more than a good sailor. He was a generous, kind human, and it's so important to Iain that he's remembered. It's always lovely to share memories of his life-loving approach, and there's plenty of stories showing just how much he touched every aspect of Iain's life. We recorded this podcast a few weeks ago, just before the might of COVID-19 really got the world's attention. We met Iain just before he delivered a speech at one of the iconic London yacht clubs, all dressed up in his suit, a beer in his hand. It was fun and emotional for a couple of hours. I hope you enjoy the time I spent with Iain Percy.
We didn't know before that we were any good, but we were just training there in Stokes Bay, but it turns out we were. For sure, that week in Sydney was life-changing for me. Train in the day, go to the gym in the evening, go to the pub after that and repeat.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast, Iain. It all feels a little bit grown up here. We're in the majestic model room at the Royal Thames Yacht Club, right in the heart of central London. And for someone I've known since he was a sort of annoying, scruffy teenager, it all feels a little bit formal.
Yeah, a long way from when we first started our dinghy sailing and Me the South Coast, you in Scotland. Yeah, we weren't visiting the Royal Thames the whole heat back in those days, but very nice of them to have us.
Well, we're enjoying the comfort of it all. Iain, when I asked you to do this, you said, why me? No one wants to hear from me. I don't sail anymore. But it wasn't that long ago that you were winning the Star Sailors League in the Bahamas. That was, 3 months? So you're obviously, you've still got that magic touch.
Well, I don't know. It's a good format for me, the SSL, because it all comes down to the last race. So I rolled the dice as well as the other 3 guys I was up against. But no, I mean, I don't not sail. I still sail the RC44, TP52s, and do still sail the Star for fun, which is a new thing for me in the last couple of years, but something I've found really life-changing. Actually, really enjoyed it.
It's pretty special that you can still go sailing and it's fun. You still have that.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't know if I would have for a few years, but it's a little bit of distance, and certainly distance from the Star meant that I come back with less, I guess, older memories, but fond ones of my time with Bart and the Star, and it makes it such a cool occasion. And I have such a good friend in Anders that I sail with as well.
Well, you've a lot of history with the Star, obviously, Iain, and we'll touch on your Olympic success there in a little bit. But you grew up, like all of us, sailing dinghies. And I used to sail Europe's alongside your older sister, Katrina. You're one of 4 kids, and I have memories staying in your family house on the south coast, boats and trailers everywhere. All 4 of you sailing, racing, travelling around the UK to events. I mean, your poor parents. What are your memories of growing up in the Percy family?
Drove our poor parents to bankruptcy, I think, in those early days. 4 kids trying to sail optimists and lasers, you can imagine. I've really quite vivid memories of the first time I went sailing, which was on the Isle of Wight, and we had recently moved there, my mum and dad. My dad had a job at the local hospital, he's a doctor, and my mum too, as a physio. And living there in the south coast in the 80s, they were wanting to find something to do with their horde of children. There was only 3 at that point, but there became 4. And sailing was a bit of a natural choice living in Southampton. So we went on this sailing holiday on the Isle of Wight. And I do remember that feeling of being on my own, which was, right at the end of a week's holiday. And you kind of just got to the point where you're allowed to hold the tiller and fly around smashing things, and just really loved that. I think, like anything you learn new, but sailing's very immersive and quite, and I guess it is solitary at that point, that freedom it gives you. So I love sailing and really took to it. And we were lucky, the clubs around there, we could really, most of our sailing was, I remember Drew was driving over the Itchen Bridge, all the 4 kids in the back of the Peugeot 504, and turning up at the sailing club, rigging the Optimist or the Laser and going out sailing. And that was really my mates at the club, I had loads of amazing fun memories of that early days. I mean, we had a promenade at the sailing club down there on Southampton Water, and whenever it was windy and too windy to sail, we'd be doing the Lego boats and sailing flying the Lego boats along the shore. And later it was, having a beer and a smoke behind the club later as you get a bit older. But the early days were really, really fond memories, and it's as ever, it's the friendships as much as your time on the water that you remember.
Special times. I remember the first time I met you, dinner at the Percy house, spaghetti bolognese. You were a confident child, I guess, in this giant body, and for some reason, I guess this is a boy thing, trying to hold your breath for as long as you could. I mean, competitive even back then.
Oh dear. Oh yeah, that's not a particularly good sport to be running. I guess I was a competitive child, more so than I am now, for sure. When you were growing up and did a lot of sports at school, and one of 4. I mean, the real competition was getting the last of the food before it ran out at the dinner table. Spaghetti bolognese or anything, it was a charge. And 4 close kids. We had a great time. We would play and hang around, but I guess I was always a bit feisty, more so than my brother. I'm really close to my brother, but growing up he was always the chilled, sensible one who never needed to take it to the last fight, and probably why we ended up getting on.
Looking back, Iain, at those formative years in the Opiate and then the Laser, it was a golden era in the UK for sailing talent. I mean, if you look at the sport now, massive names. Ben Ainslie, of course, Chris Draper, Andrew Simpson, all back then, young sailors that would end up going all the way. What was that like to be part of? And when did you start to feel, actually, quite good at this?
Well, I guess you never know at the time that you're in a strong group. You just have, I mean, the names you mentioned, many others as well that were, I mean, Nick Rogers was sailing Optimist when I was David Lenz, who's now big. There was many talented people. And I think it started from a wider base. And I think one of the things, you know, there's so many programs around the world trying to harness talent, and realistically, I believe it's a bit of a numbers game. And numbers and clusters, I'll come to that. But on the numbers game, as I said, that was me back in the 80s in Southampton. It was a natural choice to go and join a local club and learn to sail. I wouldn't say it's as big, as neither are many sports nowadays, but sailing in the 80s, certainly in the south coast of the UK, was pretty big. You know, this is a big sport. And I mean, it was often quoted as, you know, the biggest sport is football, second is fishing by participation, then sailing in the country. And you probably wouldn't say that today. And so there was a lot of people, is what I'm saying. And the bottom line is it fed the talent by a numbers game. But it then does, you know, it was great to be part of clusters. And Ben certainly made I think we made a big jump. And it comes to your question of when I thought could be all right, was around the age of 15, 16, and Ben was in Cornwall, which had been a real cluster of Optimist talent, and then myself and a few of the others were based more in the Southampton region, and Ben moved up to sail with us guys and went to the same school as me then for the last couple of years. And I think that group we had made a big difference. And I think as much as I'd say when do you realise you're good, I think up to a certain age you can make yourself good. You know, if you know what I mean, talent isn't necessarily born with, you are training it in. And we would have been doing 4 to 5 days a week, evenings and then weekends, with a group of 8 to 10, as it turned out, really talented laser sailors. And probably 5-8 years behind New Zealand, did something similar with Dean Barker, Hamish Pepper, Nick Burford. We were following in that model. And then suddenly we turn up at a World Championships and there's a couple of us in the top 5, and you realise it's about that point you think, well, yeah, no, we're not, you know, we didn't know before that we were any good, but we were just training there in Stokes Bay. But it turns out we were. You
made each other great.
I think you do. And I think, I mean, right now, age 43, your talent's not going to be building anymore. But I think when you are as a teenager, it's not just a case of how good you are inherently. You're making yourself good. You're learning things. They're becoming very instinctual. Whereas when you're older, I think you learn things and you execute them. When you're young, it becomes instinctual, and I think it did for a lot of us.
I also remember you, Iain, straight out of the laser, I mean, already too big, and into the fin class. You were a training partner at the Atlanta Games in 1996. Only 19 and already kicking everyone's butt. You were also at university studying economics. My memory is that you were smart and confident, I guess, beyond your years. What did you take away from that time being on the inside of a team that only delivered 2 silver medals?
Quite a lot. I really enjoyed that time for one, and I moved on a lot in my experiences technically, but I also think what you're touching on there, that experience of being part of an Olympic team, which you feel as a training partner, really sets you up for when I went 4 years later, because you're going, there's that kind of, you're a bit of a special group all of a sudden. When you're in a squad of youth squad, and suddenly you're the only rep or the helper to that rep, and it's very intense. And I think it makes you get used to harnessing resource, using the people around you, understanding how much skill there is in different areas, and I started to develop the sense that self-manage your program, your goals, and don't be afraid to start using help and people with more experience and skills around you. And so I saw you doing that very well, Shirley. I saw Ben starting to do that too, even though he was sailing a laser, and certainly from David Howlett. He was giving me a massive technical lesson, but he was also providing me that blueprint of you can go to David Howlett for your technical support, but you can go to Pete Cunningham to learn about fitness, and you can actually ask people to just sort out the logistics because you need it done, and otherwise it's a distraction. And so that's what I took away from it, is be ruthless, understand that you have to be free to be as good as you can be, so therefore use others. And most importantly, how much enjoyment, me as that person, I was being used to be helped, and very happy to do so. So was David Howlett, and people enjoy that. That's one thing I really took away, because I enjoyed it so much, Sid enjoyed it so much. We were helping Richard Stenhouse, and you realise, don't be afraid to ask, because actually we're all getting things out of this, and people can only say no.
That's a good motto for anyone young. I mean, did you leave there thinking, I can do that?
Yeah, I kind of did, because I was winning the warm-up regattas before the Olympics. I just wasn't doing them. So that was I wasn't frustrating at all, though, because I was too young for it in a funny way, and it was just, you know, I always knew that you can go and win warm-up regattas when you've got no pressure going into games, using the great kit that someone's done for you, and just high card. So, but I knew that, you know, if I rolled into that 96 Olympics, I wouldn't have won, but I would have been in the hunt, you know. So yeah, I realised that it made me excited about doing the next 4 years, but I had a degree to do in the middle and was determined to do that properly and enjoy that properly. So I kind of ducked out then for a few years after that.
Well, 4 years later, Iain, and it was the Millennium Games in Sydney, of course, and by now you're a firm favourite for gold in the Finn class. I mean, the whole British team felt confident. We had money, resources for the first time ever, talent, and we were well prepared with an expectation, I think, that we would deliver. And again, Ainslie, Walker, myself, of course. Looking back, it was a really special time.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on, the expectation, is key. I think it's crucial, and I mean, you saw it this week. The people listening around the world won't understand this, but Liverpool Football Club won every game for the last 2 years and then lost 2 on the trot. Why is that? Because the expectation suddenly changed. They didn't expect to win. I was part of a group with yourself and Ben, and who were winning a lot in the single-handed classes, and I was, and Iain and Mark and the Star were doing well. And but particularly us three in the single-handed classes knew we were probably on paper the best there, and we went and expected to win. And it's almost a case of winning is where success is for our group of single-handed sailors. And if you come second, you're not really winning. Well, that's expectation. I'm expecting to win. You might come second expecting to win, but you're probably not going to come fifth. And I think that's the mental state that we went into that games, the three of us. And that was, I think you feed off each other and you set a bar that you don't want to fail. And failing was second for us three into that one.
I have a real memory also, which is often quite rare in single-handed classes, of all working together, that we really shared knowledge of Sydney Harbour, and we shared technical knowledge as well. And it felt for the first time really that I wasn't just working on my own with my team, that we were actually a bigger unit.
No, it was really important. And the simple things often, that it's communication, it's people, it's that desire to work together, is so much 90% of the challenge, because we weren't writing rocket ship CFD programs on Sydney Harbour, but we were making notes and respecting each other in the sense that we would go through the notes together and we would take that time, and it's mutual respect that the three of us had for each other, and similar enough boats for it to be relevant. So yeah, I really felt that too, and it was born from respect, I think, a mutual respect from the team, and technically too, you're right, a lot of us working together with the Finn and the Europe had a lot of similarities, so that was really great, because a lot of the lessons don't have to be learnt twice.
You have a terrible memory, so you might not remember this, but you and I shared an apartment in Sydney, and I always remember that you were really amazed that I washed my sailing kit. Right? You couldn't believe that someone would do that.
Well, I coach John and Anna now, and it's a full circle, because I get kind of so distraught that they don't wash their sailing kit. And yeah, you're right. When I was in Savannah, Sid was disgusted one day. He walked into the room, and it was Derek Clark and Sid. I was sharing a room with them. It was like a dormitory, and my clothes had started migrating away from my bed and had basically filled the whole room. And one day Derek and Sid took it upon themselves to wash and iron and fold up all my clothes for me. And the worst thing for them was they didn't even notice. They came back and for me, whether it was in a mess on the floor or in the cupboard, it was kind of, didn't seem to notice. So yes, I was a bit of a mess. I still probably am a bit of a mess, but it's funny how as you get older, you start to forget what you were like.
Thinking about that medal ceremony, there was no tears from you, no outburst of emotion. You were just confident, cocky maybe. I mean, you winked at the broadcast camera. Was there just, no real emotion because you expected victory?
I would say until I sailed with someone, winning for me never really caused a static kind of feelings. It was, yep, we got that right. Okay, interesting. That meant that ABC was correct and probably D was still wrong. So I never was someone to feel comfortable standing cheering on my own on the top of a podium, and I'm much more I got so much more pleasure out of the millions of talks I had with Sid or with you or Ben about the process and getting it there. I find that I could do that all day every day, still can to this day. I love it. But yeah, the final ceremony bit in those days wasn't a big deal. It does change when you're with someone because the pleasure of others, but for me there in Sydney, no, there was one moment that was really emotional, which was sailing back from Sydney, and I didn't have to do the last two races, I don't think, but I was sailing back in, and my mum and dad were watching, and Bart was in between them, and he had his arm around both of them, twice their size, and floods of tears down his eyes, and he was waiting on the dock. That was, he'd been with me for a year helping and training, and we'd lived that Olympics, the two of us, so that got me going at the time. I do remember that, but again, it was lovely to have been part of a team thing at that point.
People often ask me this. I mean, back then, of course, British sport wasn't the medal factory that it is now. In Sydney, it was us and the rowers, wasn't it, and maybe the cyclists. Did winning gold in Sydney change your life?
Oh, definitely, because the plan at that point was to do the Olympics and then not become a pro sailor. I was intending to go and get a job and keep sailing more as a hobby. So, but it opened doors that, a little bit unplanned at the time, but opened doors that were hard to shut and didn't want to shut them. I was keen to keep going with sailing at that point. So it fundamentally changed what I did, in the sense I wasn't, working in a commercial world. I was working in sailing. But yeah, in other ways too. I think there was something that was sent to me by Greg Searle, actually, who sent me a note showing something that Redgrave had sent him, which was, winning gold won't feel like it's done anything tomorrow, except for maybe a hangover, but you'll always have a confidence when you walk into any room for the rest of your life. So I think that was a magic thing that I was just sent by Greg, and I think that you will know there is something about that happens. I don't like to think that it makes anyone think that they've, it's sport at the end of the day, but deep down, you worked really hard for something and it came off, and that somewhere stays with you for a level. So yeah, on a number of levels for sure, that week in Sydney was life-changing for me.
Jumping forward 4 years, and it was Athens. Having had such a quick success in the start, you and Stevie Mitchell, your teammate, were one of the firm favourites for the top step. The reality, though, was a struggle. You finished 6th, and even from the outside, it didn't quite look right. With a bit of hindsight, what happened in Athens?
Well, that if I talk about life changes, that probably changed me as much as anything else. I left Sydney and forgot slowly that I had put in a lot of effort, and all those talks we'd done on the venue, about the Sydney, so that I really knew which way to go and therefore needed to start on the pin and won the pin, blah, blah, blah. All forgotten, and started to think talent was important again, and somehow I had talent. It didn't help. We went and won the Worlds in the first year in the Star, and then you start to think, oh yeah, well, talent, wow. But, rubbish. It was never his talent, or there's an element, but it was certainly not enough, and got complacent. I was newly single, about 18 months before, a year before the games, so 20 whatever years old, and thought I was able to go out on the lash all the time, and talent was going to come through, and that for whatever reason I did all that stuff, but the thing that changed me was knowing I did that stuff and the feeling of absolute shame and regret to myself and everyone around me that I had not put in 100%. And don't get me wrong, I don't think anyone would have thought I hadn't tried, but I knew I hadn't tried. Not like I did every Olympics since and the Olympics probably before. I mean, it's hard for me to know in Sydney because probably I was able to go on the lash and get away with it a bit more. In the everything time since then, the one thing I've promised myself is I'd never feel guilty. I'd never be able to, I never wanted to feel like I'd not put in 100%. And that has changed me more than anything, I think. It's stuck with me for everything I've done since. And certainly for the next two campaigns and the America's Cups, but it was a horrible, horrible feeling of letting yourself and others down. Whether we'd have won or not with 100% effort, that's not what I mean. Because again, I wouldn't have cared. I'm not a stand on the podium cheering kind of guy, but I take a lot of pride in knowing that ABC was right in Sydney, and I took a lot of shame in knowing that I hadn't put in 100% in Athens. So really fundamental. So I felt, let Stevie down there too. But I mean, there were some practical things. There was no wind all week, and it wasn't our strengths as well. We weren't particularly good in light airs, both of us, and Bart addressed a lot of that. But it wasn't really my strength as well. But I could have dealt with that. It was knowing I could have done more.
Yeah, it must have been hard. I mean, the sailing team was still successful, the most successful team at the Games, but you'd missed out on a medal. I mean, it was compounded, I guess.
Yeah, all of the regret was personal, though. I mean, I was really happy for the rest of the team. That was almost a bonus, but you can enjoy the success of them and the small contributions you made through being part of a team. But yeah, no, it wouldn't have mattered if it was something completely unpublic. It was something that I knew I hadn't done enough effort for, and just never done that since, and that's a nice feeling. Being able to say you've just become a gold medalist was a pretty nice feeling. We sailed ourselves into one of the no-wind patches under the cliff, and 3 more boats or something got past us. Something that someone has coveted for 160 years, it must have weight, and it does have weight.
Back for more, building a campaign for Beijing, you turned to Andrew Simpson, Bart, of course, as we all know him. Why was that? And I guess, how did you know him? Tell us about that.
Well, I knew Bart from back in the 80s, from mid-80s. Optimist sailing, we were the same age group. He was actually, he was just my year in Optimist, but he was basically end of the year, same age as Ben. Ben was January, he was December. So we all grew up together, and we were always good friends. But got really close during the laser years, like the later laser years. In fact, we'd even clashed. I mean, the trials for the youth trials, the final year, we were equal points in the count back, and I'd gone to that youth worlds, which was hard for Bart because especially when you're friends, so we had a lot of history. I mean, many nights out, but I guess it really got confounded in the days running up into Sydney. I talked about that moment where he was with my parents. Well, that was the end of 2 years. It was a couple of years living together in Hailing Bay. His mum and dad have a small flat down there, and we used to live there year round. That was a den of iniquity, but we would live there in Hailing Island, train in the day, go to the gym in the evening, go to the pub after that, and repeat. Basically, talking rubbish to each other every night, and just having a great time growing up in your 20s, doing something you enjoyed. And so it got really, really close and during that era. And then we did the Cup together in 2007, and that was great because there was a coming together of a lot of our mates from that era, because it was a real Olympic team that was in plus 39. But we were match racing together, myself and Bart. So that was the first time we had sailed together in kind of a similar environment, and that really clicked. So I was steering. Andrew was doing main sheet tactics role for me, match racing. Gabriele Bruni, who's Keko Bruni's brother, was trimming, and we had various bowmans on the front. But the three of us did a lot of match racing together, and it really worked, and we got on well, the three of us. But I started to see how my skills were really complementary with Bart's and vice versa, in that he had such an eye in light winds, was so good at reading the side, such feel for a boat in light winds, where I had weaknesses there. And then in a kind of stronger air where it was more systematic on an offshore day, and it was play by numbers, and it wasn't picking sides so much, I was strong. So I started to realise from our match racing together that our skills were complementary, and he did, and we and really it was born. The decision to sail with him was a really tough thing, because Stevie was a great friend, and when you stop sailing with someone, you take away their ambition and their job, but you also, or in that particular boat, not their job in life, but in that boat, but you also stop a friendship and a challenge together, and I was very close with Stevie, so it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, certainly, I'd say, but it did work, and it was part of this never wanting to regret doing things again. It almost released me to make tough decisions, and something that I've you actually can forget, probably forgotten about it too much, but you need to sometimes you let yourself and others down if you don't do the tough things, and so sailing with Bart was part of that tough call with Stevie, but again, immediately clicked. I mean, I kind of knew it would, because it had worked with him in the match racing, but I went from being, it was our Bacardi Cup, which is a big star regatta, or World Championships, would read something with Stevie, would read kind of 1-1-2-1, 64th, 13th, and we'd lose on the 13th, and that was basically how our regattas were going. If there wasn't a light wind regatta, we'd win, and otherwise we were in trouble. Suddenly with Bart, we would win the light ones too. In fact, we were better in the light than we were in the strong winds, and he was able to give me real freedom in the boat. I mean, I could just pretty much point and shoot in light airs and just trim a tiny bit the speed, and he was completely controlling the boat in and out, calling the side. It was like I wasn't really having to do a whole heap all of a sudden. So yeah, brilliant, and a click, and brilliant time sailing with him, but challenging too. When you sail with your best friend, that's got some challenges, like sailing with a brother. You have some fights as well.
How was that campaign different? I mean, I guess your approach to it all, you and Bart.
Yeah, I mean, there was two things that happened. There was one, the fact that I had learned from my experiences in Athens in terms of the things I've touched upon. That was one. But the second one was the experiences from the America's Cup opened us up to more resources in terms of design skill, expertise, and also opened us up to longer hours. One of the things about the Cup, which goes with our desire to do whatever it took, because in the Cup, sometimes inefficiently, but by the nature of being a large number of people organisation, the hours become long, because meetings have to get locked in, they have to coordinate with more people, there's a lot of jobs to do, and suddenly an Olympic day can be very, very efficient and short, and I think that can be sometimes a little bit of an excuse for complacency in the athletes, because get in, I'll do my 2.5 hour training, I'll do the gym, and then that's me, that's how I've got to be efficient. Well, in the Cup you were getting in at 7 and you were leaving at 9 earliest in an evening, 7 days a week. So it opens you up to, there's a few more hours in the day if you have to. And so certainly for us, we took that same attitude into our star sailing. It was very much 7 till 9. It was, the debrief ended as we left dinner in the restaurant 9-10 o'clock, and we're straight to sleep, and we're in the gym at 7 again. That was absolute. Back to Sydney again, it was, train hard, repeat. And but yeah, then much more technical, I would say, than we were previously in the Star, because we had access to people, but kept it kind of real, always managed from myself and Bart. It was a well-run campaign, is the bottom line. We were pleased with that, and but we were lucky to get support of a lot of people. It was a team by then. We had 8 people with us for 8 people helping a star campaign. I mean, it was costing over 300,000 a year, to put it in perspective. I mean, this is much more than, that's getting up there in campaigns. I mean, my competitors at the time probably feel better now I've told them that, but, it was properly professional.
I was commentating in Beijing for the BBC, and the sailing all looked challenging, I think is probably the word. I mean, pretty hard to stack the odds. What do you remember from the racing that week?
We didn't start super well for us. We'd had challenges, as you always do in the campaign, technical challenges, and you just have to keep fighting back, trusting yourselves and the system. So that was us through the week too, and we were 13th, 14th after day one. But always had quite a confidence that if the racing went on for 1,000 races, we would win. I think that's what you need to have in your head. And then if that doesn't happen because we're not doing 1,000 races, then I'm not going to have that pain again. If there was a bit of that going on. Going into the regatta, I remember, I can honestly tell you, I understood for the first time in my life the old adage of, as long as you've done your best. Because I went in about a week before China, we'd had a training day, we'd won the training day quite well. And I remember thinking, honestly, win, lose or draw here, I'm not going to feel bad because we've done ourselves proud in terms of the amount of work we've done and the effort. And that was such a liberating feeling. I mean, because the scars of the guilt were still there, and to be liberated from that and say, actually, I really don't care if we don't win now because we deserve to win in our mind. We've done as much as we could, and we have tried our best. And so it was very liberating, and therefore could handle being 14th after the first day, because that was just, we'd made some wrong decisions, obviously, but that happens. And so you just keep pressing through. So as the week went on, we climbed up the leaderboard to be equal with Freddie going into the last race. But it was it was just about race by race and just trusting your skills, executing. I mean, the work myself and Andrew had gone into in terms of processing our communication. I mean, the detail level was huge on those kind of things. I mean, the cup you do a lot more and there's a lot more people, but you don't necessarily have the weighting of the one-on-one communication is slightly less because there's more there. So myself and Bart spent so much time being very process driven in our communication. So because we always said to ourselves, we trust ourselves to make the right decision more often than not, but we don't trust ourselves to remember to make a decision. So we had to be very process driven. But yeah, so the week went on and we just kept performing, and then got to that last race, and then fortunately the wind blew a bit for the last race because it had been really wacky all week, as China often is, but the last race was breezy. It was lucky.
I mean, that final day, it wasn't just breezy, was it? It was pouring with rain, just to add to the drama.
Yeah.
Really torrential rain.
Well, Bart's convinced that was cloud seeding. I mean, at the time and before, he had it in his head that they were going to cloud seed for the event. And of course, what was it, 12 years ago, or 10 years ago, you wouldn't have thought that was true. But now, I'm sure he was right, that they were cloud seeding up the coast. I mean, he was convinced they were going to fly planes and cloud seed, and we were going to have a windy last day. And to be fair to him, he wasn't saying it after. He was saying it all the way up, we're going to have a windy medal race because they're going to cloud seed for the last day. And it did happen.
And he was right. It was so dramatic, wasn't it? And as you said, you had to beat, Sweden's Fredrik Löf to win that gold medal. Just talk to us a little bit about, when it was finally done and you crossed the line and you had gold and you'd done all that work with Bart. What did you say to each other? How was that?
That was pretty ecstatic. I remember coming up just to cross the line or just after, just saying, Bart, you just won a gold medal, and again, just knowing for him everything he'd put in, because at that point he'd put in an effort for others, for the 2 Olympics before for Ben as a training partner, for me in Sydney. I mean, it was to think that I knew how much my life had changed on different levels in 2000, and suddenly I knew that was about to happen for Bart, and no more deserved, and after giving to others to achieve it for so long. So being able to say that to him, you've just become a gold medalist, was a pretty nice feeling to be able to say that. And yeah, obviously with 2, it's just so much easier to get into the celebrations. I mean, that was quite a big night. I remember in China, we were almost in some dodgy jail at the end of the night. They weren't used to seeing that level of debauchery or that thing. But, it was just absolute relief, complete happiness, mainly for Bart because he had given so much for so long, and real relief for me and him because we'd put in so much into that games and so much effort, and for it to have not come off would have been, it wouldn't have felt guilty, but it would have been frustrating. And so that's the emotion that I felt, was relief that I didn't have to feel frustrated. I didn't need to feel relief about the guilt. I'd had that ticked off the week before we started.
My lasting memory of your win there was, Princess Anne was there, wasn't she? Soaking wet and was absolutely chucking it down to give you the medals. And there you were, the two of you, drenched through in your tracksuits, but so emotional. These two giant bears of men holding on to each other so tightly. It was, it's, even now I'm thinking about it, it was unforgettable.
Yeah, I'm sure he felt the same. It's so much easier to be happier and more kind of celebratory happy about your best mate, you know what I mean, than it is about yourself, because it's a little bit embarrassing to say, oh, well done yourself. But when it's not, you're not thinking that. You're thinking, I was thinking everything he'd done for me and Ben over the last 12 years, and he was thinking, I'm sure, how much effort I'd put in over the last 4 years along with him, and just that feeling of, it's just somehow better and easier to celebrate with someone else. Being on your own is in a class is just different, that's all. And when you're doing it with someone else, yeah, that bit of it's more fun. I think the highs and the lows are bigger when you're with people. The lows are big. You see in cup teams, lows are big when there's 100 people. Lows are bigger when there's 2 than when we're with 1, but highs are bigger too. And for us there, it was pretty special. You're right, driving down with rain, but just didn't even notice.
From China, next up was the prospect of delivering at a home games in London. I mean, there was a great buzz at home, wasn't there? I mean, how much more intense did that all feel?
Not hugely, to be honest. I mean, because I kind of stay out of all the Olympic-y hype. I listened to my BBC Radio 4 in the morning, and then I'd go down and have ages on the phone, working with Bart and the coaches on the boat, and that's my life, and that's what I love. And it wasn't really any different being in China or being in Weymouth. Rained a bit more in Weymouth, but so no, I wouldn't say that affected me particularly. It was nice to be able to base myself at home. I guess that was just lifestyle improvement, but. No, it didn't affect me. We just absolutely process driven and trying to achieve in Olympic Games, wherever it was for us then. And again, felt comfy going in, had that same feeling of having given it a lot of effort.
I mean, you were always training. If you ever wanted to interview the pair of you, it was always on the verge of getting too dark. It felt and looked like you were working harder than ever before. I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, I think probably because it just ramps up. You realise there's more in the tank. I mean, yeah, we came in the dark 60% of the days, probably because we spent a lot of time in the coffee shop talking about it in the morning too. But the start time would push back. That would be our coaches come back. But yeah, many times. And testing a lot of equipment too, which is, as anyone knows, is time consuming rather than necessarily intense as well. So for a lot of that period, it would be long days for testing. You get people who know the old cup boats. They are long days, and so you need to acquire data. We were much more data driven by then. Data analytics were becoming more of a thing. We were kind of on the head of the curve on that in Olympic sailing terms, and fully instrumented boats. So along with data comes need for time to do something with that data. So the days get longer and longer. I think it's the same in any sport. As we have more information, we need more time to process it. But the result is higher level at the end.
Well, it all started off as scripted, and you were really strong in those opening races, big physical days out in the bay in Weymouth. Talk us through what you remember, though, of the medal race.
I remember the last bit, destroying my tiller extension. I remember the venue was on somewhere called the Nove Tavern. For those who don't know it, it's down just off a nice castle there in Weymouth. If it's from the traditional westerly direction, if it's slightly right of that, it can be quite shifty because it's not a huge cliff, but it's a cliff, and you're so close, you're effectively sailing in a cliff. So difficult venue there. The left-hand side, it comes over more over the harbour wall rather than the cliff. So generally you'd stretch out left, and so we'd done quite a lot of time on that venue. It was never something you could bank 80-20, but this on our statistics for that course was a 70-30 left. And so I think we had a 17-point lead on the next person, or 16 or something, and then 1 or 2 more to Freddie. So Robert and Bruno were a bit behind. So we came off the line, good start, tight, and actually Freddie was the windward boat, and we spat them out, so forced them to the right. So we thought, fine, we'll keep covering the left where Robert was, which we thought. And then, but our mistake was that we weren't super high off the line. So it's just, I was aware of that, but it's a big call to go away from what you think is the favoured side if you're just because you're slightly below mean. But anyway, probably getting too much to the pain and the details here. But Freddie and Max went right, came in, had a good race, first or second, and we still kind of in our head thought we just needed to make sure that Robert wasn't going to get anywhere near the front and we'll be all right. And then on the last run, we sailed ourselves into one of the no-wind patches under the cliff, and 3 more boats or something got past us. And it was a bit of a shock moment. It was a bit of a kind of, as it was happening, you're suddenly realising, but you kind of can't quite accept that is the case in your head, and you're like, yeah. Oh, and then it all starts to slowly sink in that you have just thrown it away. Yeah.
What was that feeling like? Yeah,
it was a little bit of kind of, impotence. You can't do anything about it because you just, oh my God, what have we just done? Because you realise you could have done different decisions at different moments, and but a real impotency, because at that point you can't do anything. You're just waiting to dribble through the line, it's having just thrown away seemingly from nowhere. So yeah, that was it quickly turned to my anger, and I smashed the tiller tension up a bit. Probably cameras turned away at that moment. I mean bloody tough. One thing was that Freddie was someone I always liked and respected, which made quite a big difference. He I wouldn't say certainly he had a lot of success. It wasn't in the sense that Bart, who had never been to a Games, but he hadn't won an Olympics before and had been pretty close for a lot of years. So I did feel happiness for him. I remember giving him a hug after and just saying how pleased I was for him. And you can dissociate those feelings and get that kind of, be happy for someone else. So I was able to do that. Yeah. Big night on the piss, a few bad memories, a few nightmares, scars, but ultimately I didn't feel shame for what we had done. I didn't come away beating I didn't feel myself. I hadn't let myself or Bart or anyone down. We just got that race wrong, and we made sensible decisions at each stage of the game. They turned out to be wrong. That's our sport, and it can happen, right? So I didn't have personal regret, just frustration, really.
I mean, my memory is, you held your head up high and did what was right, but the photos and the footage of the medal ceremony show a devastated Bart. How did you deal with that together? You'd won a silver medal. To anyone else, bar maybe Ben Ainslie, a home games medal would have been amazing, but to the two of you, it must have been tough.
Yeah, well, it was. Yeah. Well, he was like me. What can you do? It is our sport, especially the medal race setup. When you go to random venues, double the points. It's a funny, there wasn't a whole heap of logic in the start, because we didn't really have any more boats when we did all the other races, and then suddenly you just double the points and put it in a rubbish place. But it's easy to be churlish. We didn't make the right decision. We had a header off the line and weighted it wrong. It's wrong. There's always luck in these decisions, so we can't really blame anyone for it. It's just the chips didn't fall our way. They fell our way by the cloud seeding and having a good breezy race in China, maybe, and a nice pair won. And it's those things that you tell yourself and tell Bart, and Bart tells me, and that's how you get over it. If you ever get over it, I don't know, but you kind of get over the initial irritation and frustration and anger, I guess. But But yeah, it was a less celebratory night out in Weymouth than China, shall we say. But the family were there, so it was probably in both cases it needed to be slightly different than the China night out anyway.
We've talked a lot about the Olympics, Iain, but you've also spent a lot of time as well involved in the America's Cup. Can you remember that first time you got the call to join a cup team?
Yeah, but it was from Luca Devotti, so there's always an experience when you get a call from Luca anyway. But no, it was a fantastic opportunity because growing up, the Olympics and the America's Cup and the Volvo were the things that I saw, and it's the pinnacle of our sport. And there was less other stuff then. It was pretty clear that they were. My skills were more suited to America's Cup, so it was just great to be thinking about getting involved with that. So I knew a lot of people there already because there were Olympic guys that were involved in the Star and stuff. So no, it's brilliant. I mean, and had some of the best times in my life with the Cup as well. As I said, the highs are bigger with bigger teams and the lows are lower. So the highs have been good.
I mean, it was an exciting time, wasn't it? I mean, the Cup in Valencia, that was what I'd call the last of the more traditional Cups, wasn't it? You know, monohulls, quite a few teams. Did you ever think that your Italian team would actually win it?
No, probably not. I mean, that's not true. Because at first you don't know what you don't know, so you kind of can dream. As you learn more, you realise no. But not necessarily. I mean, for lack of money for us, a bit for sure. I mean, but it's
plus
one.
39, we should
yeah,
say.
plus 39, which was a band of Finn and Star sailors, basically. But the design side of it is just basically what the America's Cup's about, and the design side is the synergy between the whole team. So I'm not saying it's the designers, but the design side is a big thing. But it takes experience, and it takes the accumulation of knowledge, be that in computational tools or just experience, maybe more in those days. You need to have that, and a new team don't have that, is the bottom line, unless they buy it in. And so that's where money can shortcut it, as it did in that Cup, because Alinghi were a new team. No, they weren't, but they had been when they won it. So, it was an honour to be part of it. You know, it wasn't one of those phone calls where you're making it rich. That wasn't plus 39's days. We were very much doing it for the experience and for wanting to do the America's Cup, and that's gone a bit now because the teams that are left are fully professional teams. I mean, I like to remind people of that when I was trying to hire them as a boss of a Cup team, how much the skipper of plus 39 was paid to do it, or when he was paid, it was certainly less than anyone in the Artemis team in 2017.
You were the helmsman, weren't you?
Yeah.
Plus 39. That's quite something, I think, to line up, to go from your fin and your star to that. Yeah, for sure. I mean, technically the boats are quite aligned. It's not necessarily big jumps there, but my experience of match racing was lacking, and the team globally's technical knowledge was and kind of ability to evaluate results was lacking. But it was brilliant experience, and the match race stuff I touched on, I did earlier with Bart and Gabriella Bruni was a real stepping stone for me in a match racing that I then did later with Ben and Bart, but also felt that at least I could hold my own in the starts. I mean, the funny thing is that in those days, until you do a lot of this fighting in the match race at the start, but it's all a bit irrelevant because a quick boat goes straight round you, and to have a passive start is relatively easy. So if you're in the faster boat, you saw in that final between Alinghi and Team New Zealand, they didn't need to beat them in the start, they just needed to start roughly even, and they won. What is it about the Cup, do you think, that's so compelling?
I'm trying to think now. Well, growing up, because that was when I was compelled by it as an outsider, it was the secrecy, the design, the glamour, and the fact it was professional. I remember watching the TV program on the wing keel and everything. It was all that intrigue, stuff that excites people, and that's continued with spying and everything to the date. And intrigue comes when a lot of money's being spent, when there's a lot of design. I think it's those aspects of it, the personalities, as ever in sport, that really fires it up. It's the history, for sure, too. I mean, you have to covet something to for it to be important, and something that someone has coveted for 160 years. You realise it. You know, even if you didn't know before, you realise a lot of people have in the past, and therefore it must have weight, and it does have weight. The trophy itself, pretty cool, adds to that weight of history. So you put it all together, and it has a cocktail that makes it more special than anything else in sailing. But ultimately, when you're in a team, you have to forget all that, because it's all completely irrelevant. It's just about doing a better job of all the details of design and sailing and the amalgamation of that.
There we have it, podcast listeners. We're leaving it there for this episode, but you don't have to wait long, I promise. We'll be publishing part 2 in a couple of days, kicking off with Iain's move to Swedish America's Cup team Artemis Racing. Please, as ever, let me know what you think about the podcast at Shirley Sail on Instagram and Twitter, just me on Facebook. And please do remember to like, review and subscribe on whatever platform you're joining us on. It'd be great to know what you thought of Iain's pod. As ever, the podcast is expertly produced by Tim at Vertigo Films. Thank you, Tim. It's really important to us that we bring you a high quality listen. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and stay safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
We're 1.5 below.
Stand by, 2 dives here, boys.
We're looking at 10.5 and 42. This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.